$36 an hour. Their Booster Juice offering $36 an hour to a temporary foreign worker. They specifically say they want it to be a temporary foreign worker. Why aren't they offering those jobs to Canadian kids first?
You know, I've always been against the temporary foreign worker program. In the past, it's been very limited. For example, some farmers claim they just literally can't get enough workers for a particular crop picking season, so they need the help. And I don't know, I suppose that rings true to me, but again, very limited. Time-specific, job-specific, not replacing Canadian workers as a general business strategy. That's exactly what's been happening in Canada the past 10 years under Trudeau. Temporary foreign workers are not temporary at all, and they've displaced a whole generation of young Canadians. Youth unemployment is out of control. And here in Mississauga, where the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, Michelle Garner-Rempel, and another MP, Garnet Genuis, had a news conference announcing their plan to, I'll say it in a word, scrap the temporary foreign workers program. You take a look at some of his comments.
Some very talented and hardworking people who cannot get jobs here in Canada. And let's be honest, young people today form what I call Generation Screwed. Let's look at the situation for this generation. It is the first generation that cannot afford a home in Canadian history. And now, the double gut punch. They have the highest, or the worst employment numbers of any group of young people since the late 1990s. So you can't get a job, and even if you did have a job, you can never buy a home after 10 years of Liberal government. We have major problems in our job market. Let's look at the facts here. The unemployment rate for those aged 15 to 24 is now 14.6%. The employment rate, the share of young people who are employed, is at its lowest level in over a quarter century outside of the pandemic. 1.6 million Canadians were unemployed in July, 7.4% increase in unemployment insurance requests since Mr. Carney took office. Almost 400,000 Canadians have been continually searching for work for over 2 years, the highest share of long-term unemployment since 1998. There are 16,000 more people unemployed in Ontario than there were in the Great Recession. Ontario has seen a massive increase in job losses and a massive decrease in home building. Nearly 75% of temporary foreign workers that come into the country are for low-wage positions, which means they compete with working class and young people that ultimately drive down wages and drive away jobs. Tim Hortons has hired an unimaginable 1,131% more temporary foreign workers in the last 4 years. In the first half of this year alone, the TFW program has imported 74% more low-skilled labor than in all of 2015. TFWs, the number of temporary foreign workers, is now 2% of our overall workforce, and a staggering number, an unprecedented number. Now, the Liberals promised they would cap the temporary foreign worker program at 82,000, but in the first 6 months, they've already handed out 105,000 permits. Canadian jobs for Canadian workers. Canada first, Canada always. That's why Conservatives are calling on the Carney government to permanently scrap the temporary foreign worker program and to stop issuing visas for any new temporary foreign workers coming into the country. Under this proposal, existing permits would be wound down until the program is entirely eliminated. Canadian jobs will go to Canadian workers first. It's time that Mr. Carney took the job seriously of repairing the damage that his party has done.
Well, I think that's a good idea. And I mean, we've heard outrageous reports of how the temporary foreign workers program has been used in the past, where staff at a company were told to train their foreign replacements and then they were laid off. You can't go into a retail outlet, a restaurant, a drive-through, a 7-Eleven without having foreign workers. I'm not talking about Canadian citizens who are ethnic minorities. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about foreign nationals who are brought here, really, let's not dance around it, as a kind of slave wage economy. I mean, obviously they are not literally slaves, although some of them are exploited. They're like indentured workers. They have to give a kickback to their employer. You know, I think throughout time, slave economies have been sort of the secret juice to economies. They're free workers. They're low-cost workers. That's how the United States used slaves in the early years of the Republic to pick crops, temporary foreign workers, but they were permanent and they were indentured. I'm not saying that temporary foreign workers as a program is morally as repugnant as actual slavery, but it is of the same solution, isn't it? We can't do this work, or we can, but we'd rather save a few dollars an hour by bringing in foreigners to be an underclass. They are exploited. Now, it's better work for them than staying at home if they were in Afghanistan or rural Pakistan or India. I can understand why Canada is the dream place, and they all know they're a soft touch. They can apply to be refugees once they're here, or they can just simply not go home. Who's going to enforce the law? Mark Carney? So I think we have to scrap the temporary foreign worker program. That's exactly what Poilievre called for, but here's the thing. He is not the Prime Minister. The Liberals will never do that. So I put a question to them, and I just sort of came up with it on the spot. Is there something Pierre Poilievre could do in the meantime? Here's the question I put, and the answer I got.
Hi, Ezra Levant from Rebel News. I thought it was very interesting about Booster Juice paying $36 an hour to a foreign worker. And I think a lot of Canadians don't know how pervasive this is, and that's an outrageous anecdote. I don't think the Liberals are going to accept your advice here, so I think your reforms wouldn't be able to bite until you become Prime Minister if that happens. But I think there is something you could do in the meantime. And let me ask you if you would consider this. I'm actually just doing some brainstorming here. Would you consider shining a spotlight using your bully pulpit on the worst offenders? For example, maybe a company that really wraps itself in the Canadian flag, like Tim Hortons. Would you consider having an event outside of Tim Hortons? Would you consider writing to the board of directors of RBI and the Brazilian hedge fund? And I guess what I'm saying is there's no downside to these companies hiring foreign workers. But if there was a PR downside, if patriotic Canadians said, this is enough. I notice in the UK there's a lot of people waving British and English flags. It's their response to immigration crises. Would you consider naming and shaming in the public domain abusers of the TFW program?
Yes, and thank you for the question. Michelle Rempel has already begun the process. She's been publishing the most egregious cases of corporate elites profiting by shutting Canadians out of jobs in favor of low-wage temporary foreign workers. And Michelle, do you want to add anything to that? Sure. Come on over.
No, thanks for the question, Ezra. It's absolutely egregious that these companies expect that they can just maximize corporate profits on the backs of and at the expense of Canadian youth. It's a practice that has to end. We've been naming and shaming them all week. I want to thank my team for finding those examples, but I encourage Canadians to go and look for themselves. There's been websites that have been set up so that people can see what these companies are doing. But the more important thing is, Ezra, that the Liberals are letting them do this. The Liberals are totally letting them do this. You know, Lena Diab, where was she this summer, the immigration minister? Did she name and shame any of these people? No, she didn't. And that's why we're here today. We're standing up for the people that are behind us. Enough is enough. Canadian jobs have to go to Canadians.
Well, I think we have to name and shame these companies, and we have to do the opposite as well. We have to praise companies that hire Canadians. I was in Costco the other day, and it's so clear they have avoided the temporary foreign worker economy. Their staff are Canadians, and I say again, they're from different ethnic minorities. This is not a racial comment. This is a national comment. At Costco, they have a very strong human resources strategy. They pay well, they recruit well, they have staff stick around for a long time. And I think it shows off in better customer service. I think Costco is sort of world famous for customer service. That's a very different strategy than the Tim Hortons strategy of just bring in foreigners and shave off $1 an hour or $5 an hour. You know what, speaking as a consumer, obviously we all want to save money, but if someone said, would you pay an extra 25 cents for your coffee? And think about it, you know, how many hundreds of coffees would any of these restaurants serve in a day? Of course, 25 cents per coffee would pay for hiring a Canadian. And we heard an anecdote today of a worker at Booster Juice. You know what Booster Juice is? It's just a restaurant chain that has smoothies and whatnot, offering $36 an hour to a foreign worker. If you work 2,000 hours a year, which is sort of a full-time job, that's a $72,000 a year job. Are you telling me there's no Canadians who would work that? Here's a reference to that number right now.
These job postings, I think it was it Booster Juice, the one you came up with yesterday? $36 an hour. They're Booster Juice offering $36 an hour to a temporary foreign worker. They specifically say they want it to be a temporary foreign worker. Why aren't they offering those jobs to Canadian kids first? And I'm not now speaking about any particular employer, but we know that there's a lot of abuse in this system where the employers are asking for some of the wage back from their worker. I'm not alleging that for Booster Juice, but it is happening out there. It is a very exploitative system that has allowed corporate elites to profit off of driving wages down and driving jobs out, and we're going to put an end to it.
Yeah, I like the idea of name and shame. And it sounds like they've been doing a little bit of that, but I think they have to formalize it. I think they have to go heavy on it. And I think they have to zero in on one particular company and just beat the living daylights out of them pour encourager les autres. And here's what I mean by that. What is the downside to using temporary foreign workers in your restaurant? First of all, everyone else is doing it. So if you don't do it, you might have an extra payroll cost. Second of all, we've all become numb to it, I suppose. Oh, that's how things are now. So there's no cost. But if we can impose a cost on corporate behemoths like Tim Hortons, a social cost, a PR cost, maybe they would say, all right, we've got a choice here. Hire a Canadian at maybe $1 or $2 more an hour, or have our market capitalization beat up. Just like, Americans are really good at this. Remember a few weeks ago when Cracker Barrel, the restaurant, if you've never been there, I recommend it on the next trip to the USA, they hired a new CEO that was very woke and got rid of, there was a picture of a white guy and a barrel on their logo, and they purged it, and that caused a big backlash. Cracker Barrel lost $200 million in market cap. That was their customers saying, what are you doing? We like that old-timey Southern flavor. Don't go all woke on us. It's the same thing that happened to Bud Light. It's the same thing that happened to Jaguar. So what if we could impose a PR cost on the worst offenders of temporary foreign workers like Tim Hortons? That's an idea I put to Pierre Poilievre, and he basically said yes. Now, I think he's in a position to do it at a very high level. I think he could write a letter to the CEO and the board of directors of Tim Hortons. By the way, if you think Tim Hortons is Canadian, you're living about 30 years in the past. It is a foreign-owned company. It's owned by RBI, Restaurant Brands International, I think that stands for, and they in turn are owned by American investors and a large Brazilian hedge fund. Isn't that crazy? If you think Tim Hortons is all Canadian, you are dead wrong, my friends. Their largest owner is in Brazil. So not only are they pretending to be Canadian, that's what gets me. If they said, all right, we're Brazilian, if they said we're globalists, all right, so you're admitting who you are, and that's your identity, and you're embracing it. But if you fly the flag like Tim Hortons flies, but you refuse to hire Canadians, to hell with you. That's a form of false advertising. You're a deceiver. I want to think some more about this, and maybe Rebel News can get in on the action ourselves. You know, we got that beautiful billboard truck, and we have used that kind of campaign against Tim Hortons before. I don't know if you know this. You got to be an old-timer like me. But 10 years ago, when Rebel News was very young, Tim Hortons did an atrocious thing. They had these little TVs in their coffee shops back then that they would allow companies to buy ads. So it wasn't just Tim Hortons stuff. It was, you could be an advertiser. You could be a bank. And they were just very quick ads. And so I think it was Enbridge, an oil pipeline company, took out a very neutral ad, and Tim Hortons banned them. And they made some statement about it being outside their ethical taste or something, like Tim Hortons was morally superior to Enbridge. Coffee, Tim Hortons, which is beloved by the oil patch. All these oil and gas guys stop by Tim Hortons for a coffee and a donut, and Tim Hortons basically said, F you. You're not good enough for us. It was outrageous, and we had a boycott Tim's campaign. And I should tell you, look at me. I mean, you don't get a body like this without having the odd donut. I personally, for 10 years, have kept that bad. In fact, that's what pushed me to get to know McDonald's coffee, which I think is actually an excellent coffee. By the way, I don't think McDonald's is off the hook here. I haven't checked, but it wouldn't surprise me if they have temporary foreign workers too. I think any company that emphasizes its Canadianness should be held to account if they have an anti-Canadian job platform. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like McDonald's, you know, the apostrophe in McDonald's is a little Canadian maple leaf, know that? And I think every company with the maple leaf in their logo or that tries to brand itself as Canadian, I think they need to be named and shamed. I think it should be done at the high level by people like Pierre Poilievre writing to their boards of directors, but I think it should be done at the grassroots level. And I think you can have it as a general rule of thumb, but I think the most successful way would be to focus like a laser on one or two of the worst behaved companies. And maybe we Canadians could try and get a little bit of that U.S. consumer rebellion like happened to Cracker Barrel or Bud Light. And even what's going on in the UK right now, you know I love to follow the battles in the UK, and there's a real response to the government. People are flying their national flags, the Union Jack, and then the other country flags like England and Scotland. I think we got to do that, and we got to push back. And yeah, that's my report today. I enjoy going to these press conferences, and I try and think of a useful question. Hopefully you thought it was. Cheers. To see more of our recording on this subject, go to migrantreports.com.